Hey guys, let's talk about sequential art and what makes it really beautiful and how we can improve our storytelling. And for this, I got a little slideshow, and here we go. Sequential art, how it's your friend. Comic book panel transitions. Now, this is a really critical element in how you develop your story and tell your story over a sequence of pages and panels, right? And to do this, to explain this, I'm going to borrow from Scott McCloud, comic book guru, that has a great book, Making Comics, and another one, Understanding Comics. If you want to learn the ins and outs of making comics, I highly recommend his books. They have a great level of detail and really thoughtful information on how to do this right. So I'm going to borrow from his chapter on panel transitions to explain the process. So here you go. These are the books. Check them out. Here are the panel transitions that he identifies. First, moment to moment, action to action, subject to subject, scene to scene, aspect to aspect, and non sequitur. Say that 3 times fast. So let's break it down and what that really means. And I'm going to use Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns to explain it. To me, one of the high points of comic book storytelling. If you want to look at a book that really understands the medium, this is the one for you. It's not for the faint of heart, though. It's a little bit adult, but enjoy it. Moment to moment. Okay, this kind of panel transition is what you might think of as you're telling a very deliberate action, right? And if you look at Scott McCloud's description, what you're doing is you're actually freezing time and you're showing each beat, each moment that something happens. It's very good for demonstrating something, for it's almost like a slow motion view of a scene. It's really emphasizing the action. And so that moment to moment is that important transition where you really want to show deliberately what's happening. So if we look at Frank Miller's version, let's see how it works. This is one of the opening scenes where Bruce Wayne is racing, um, racing sports cars, and you can see how it kind of slows down time. There's all this, close-up view of him. He's dealing with this, problem with his car, and there's flames, and there's gritting his teeth, and then there's a screeching tire. But it's all this moment-to-moment action. It's like I said, slowing it down so you can really observe it, look at it, and appreciate it and understand what's happening. That's actually one of my favorite things about comics is the fact that you can slow down time. Also, in comics, you're in control of the pace. When you're watching a movie or you're watching an animated film, the director is in control of the pace of the story. They're the one that decides to hold the camera a little bit longer, to speed it up, to go to slow motion, right? But you as a reader control the pace. And that's one of the things I love about comics is you can continually look at a page and review what you see. All right? So that moment-to-moment action is really critical for slowing things down. Action to action. All right, this is one of those, like a fast cut type of idea where you're really doing good editing and you're showing this alternating action. It keeps the pace going really fast. It's almost like the opposite of moment to moment. It's like you're moving boom, boom, boom. So here we have Scott McCloud showing this gymnast, moving from a deliberate action, brushing her hands, running, jumping, landing, celebrating. Okay, so these are actions that are happening in a sequence. It's not moment to moment. It's skipping ahead to the critical keyframe that shows what happens. Enough so the viewer gets it. Let's see that in Frank Miller. Batman flying down from the sky, jumping down, landing on top of the car, screeching out of control, losing control, putting his hands on the top, flipping over the car, landing, boom, action to action. This is what really makes it look like something moving. And again, one of my favorite things about comics is that you can really isolate the cool part of the action, right? So when you're drawing comics, think about what's cool. What do you want to show? Show the best part. Don't show a boring part. You're in absolute control. So pick the thing that really, shows Batman flexing his muscles, shows him flipping, pivoting, and then landing in that way. That's what's really fun about it. The next, subject to subject. All right, so this is not just changing action to action. It can almost be confused with that a little bit, but it's moving from person to person or thing to thing, right? So it works pretty well in a conversation. It's where you're having one person talk, the next person reply, the next person, the next subject that comes up, they're talking back and forth, right? It doesn't just have to be conversations, but it's when something is moving from thing to thing. Here is an example of some talking heads in Frank Miller's Dark Knight. You've got Batman and James Gordon talking back and forth, and there's this cool way that he shows in kind of this noir way of talking. Gordon's smoking. It's a close up, it's a far away, distant shot, and they're going back and forth in their conversation. And so there's room for that conversation. They've made room for the text balloons where you can actually fill out what they're saying. And then on the flip page, you've got the Joker, and he's having his conversation with his henchman. And it's a back and forth and a back and forth. Very cinematic. It's very interesting the way he does it. Another interesting kind of meta thing that he does, Frank Miller does in this Batman Dark Knight Returns, is he puts these little inset frames of like a TV screen, almost like we, the viewer, are watching TV the entire time the story is progressing. And these TV commentators pop in like narrators, but they also come in like absurdist ideas of, what's wrong with modern culture. So it's a really interesting subtext that plays along. But again, it's that subject to subject motion that progresses the story, in this case with dialogue and imagery, but it really progresses what's happening in a complex way that you, the viewer, puts together. Scene to scene. So this is kind of an abbreviated form of storytelling where you're not trying to tell a direct action scene. You're not trying to get a direct conversation going. You're not trying to do a lot of exposition. In fact, you're trying to maybe speed up the story a little bit, move from thing to thing. So here's Scott McCloud's version. Kind of shows this dude watching TV 1 year later, meanwhile, somewhere else. This is a way of abbreviated storytelling, moving the story along, getting to the essential, and not slowing it down. In this scene, we've got Batman who's kind of reconsidering his life, thinking about Robin, thinking about things that have happened. Then it cuts to a scene of some gangsters, and then, Two Face's coin flips and lands on the table. And then it cuts to a scene of Batman and Alfred talking in the dark. So definitely it moves that story quickly in time and space, moves from one element to another, and that story moves forward. Sometimes you don't notice it because of the continuity, but other times you do, and you really get that progression of time. And so use that scene to scene to really tell a story in that fast-paced way. Aspect to aspect. So these kinds of story changes are very sophisticated, and it helps set a mood for what's happening in the scene or on the page. It's something very clever, and you might notice it in some storytelling in movies and TV where maybe you don't know what's happening. So in the beginning, you might see in Scott McCloud's version here, you see rain falling on a store that's closed, a guy with an umbrella dropping water droplets, a kid playing in the rain, a lonely stairway, and then a sad person inside their room. So, what's the mood that's created through those little vignettes? We, the audience, we fill in the gaps. We put all those pieces of the story together and we get the overall impression that, oh, this is a sad and dreary day. And then we finish on the main character who is having a sad and terrible day, right? So we've gotten that impression of what's happening through those other little vignettes, those other little aspects that change our perspective. So by themselves, they may not mean a whole lot, but shown separately, shown together, the story comes clear. This is a really cool, vibrant way of showing what happened to Batman and his memory. He's thinking about the death of his parents. And so as you snap from one frame to the next, you see his grief and the way he's dealt with the grief. And though his, shattered memory of a gun, a bullet, a trigger pull, a hand, all those things happening aspect to aspect as he's kind of progressing through his memory. You have the present day, the past, his memory, the bullet casing flying in the sky. Love it. So powerful. And I think what increases that cadence is the fact that every single panel is the same size. He's literally got 12 panels on the page. That's really uncommon. But the way it's done inside those little mini frames, the little borders are so thin that you just feel like it's boom, 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 moving through the frames of a piece of film. Love it. So beautiful, powerful. Non sequitur. This one's hard to explain because it doesn't make sense. It's a non sequitur. But when you're playing around with storytelling, sometimes people like the absurdist idea of just putting things together that don't belong together and see what happens because of that, right? So our mind, we naturally, as human beings, try to find the story in the disparate elements. And so a non sequitur like this, where you're just showing these separate elements, even though they weren't put together to mean anything, you still try to find meaning. And maybe you can, your subconscious can, I don't know. I'm not really an absurdist. I don't really like this kind of thing, but sometimes the juxtaposition can be really jarring and interesting. And I still return to that scene where Batman is remembering this terrible tragedy in his life. And to a certain degree, it is kind of a non sequitur. When you look at what images he shows, like the focus on the pearls and how the pearls break apart and then go back together and pull apart. And then that shell casing. And then Batman here and there and pushing over the statue. It is a little bit of a non sequitur, but because we know what it relates to, we get it and we fill in the gaps. Personally, that's probably more what that means to me using that kind of storytelling technique is I like having the juxtaposition of those different elements and then your mind fills in the gaps. I mean, your mind really is what you're going for when you're telling a story is you want that audience engagement so they fill in the gaps. And that's really what comic book storytelling excels at is you pick what you want to show and then it's the in between the panels that really matters and tells the story. All right. So that's what I think is so fun about comics and about comic book storytelling is finding those ways of presenting your story in the image, in the text, and then what you don't show can also be just as powerful. So have fun making comics. Let me know what you do. See you around.